So I want to make this quick video. I'm working on editing last week's Brain Hack Diary, but I really need to say something about this Muslim ban. The thing that's prompting me to make this is Elon Musk, someone I have an enormous amount of respect for. I love his work with Tesla, SolarCity, SpaceX. He tweeted out an article by the Wall Street Journal posting the full text of the bill. The idea is he wanted to encourage people to read it and make up their own minds. Several people replied to him saying, well, this doesn't look as bad as people say it is, and he responded supportively to these people. Now, the Wall Street Journal has a paywall. I think the way it works is you can only read so many articles at the same time, even if it's coming back to the same one. But I have read it in full, and it is absolutely every bit as bad as people make it out to be. There are a few things I want to touch on here. First, it creates this narrative that people from the Middle East, ever since 9/11, have been coming to the United States and just committing crimes. It does mention terrorist acts specifically, but it does use just the general word crimes plenty of times throughout this bill. This narrative is simply not true. I'm going to link to a clip from John Oliver's show where he talks about just how extreme the vetting process already was before this bill came along. And this features one man specifically who was held up for months due to the bureaucracy of the process. Now that talks specifically about refugees, but just in terms of green card holders, visa holders in general, there is far less crime committed by them. Beyond the statistics, think about this logically. They have no reason to attack people in the United States, to commit crimes. And they know how restrictive these processes are, having been through them, so they're naturally inclined not to want to do anything that will end up with them being sent back. The bill talks very clearly, no attempt to hide it behind deceptive language or anything like that, about a 90-day ban of all people from 7 Middle Eastern countries in particular from coming to the United States. Now, we've already heard the stories about green card holders that have been held up, people that are just trying to get in to see their family that have, maybe gone away briefly and are just coming back. One of the countries not on that list is Saudi Arabia. Now, just to be very clear, I want 0 countries on this list, including Saudi Arabia. But given that the majority of the 9/11 attackers were from Saudi Arabia, you would expect that if this really had anything to do with, protecting national security, you would expect to see Saudi Arabia on that list, wouldn't you? Well, it turns out there are certain countries in the Middle East where Donald Trump has golf courses, and every single one of those countries is exempt from the list, Saudi Arabia being one of them. This has nothing to do with national security at all. This is just an attack on all Muslims. Now, everything I've said so far is simply a collection of arguments that have already been made on Twitter. If you've been following the story, you're probably well aware of them already. But there is one final thing, because it deals with questions about how we should address discrimination, bigotry, things like that, going forward. The bill makes the argument that many people coming from these countries have backward attitudes when it comes to, I guess, what you would call social justice issues. When I read this, I immediately thought of the Pew polls that Sam Harris likes to continually cite about how widespread things like homophobia and sexism are in the Middle East among just ordinary people. And I've also heard arguments from people saying that people like me like to condemn things like homophobia, sexism, but we're suspiciously silent when things like these polls get cited. And we resort to defense along the lines of, well, that's just their culture, that we should respect their culture. Let me be crystal clear. I condemn sexism, full stop, period. I condemn homophobia, full stop, period. There is no contradiction between me saying that and also saying it is a systemic cultural issue. I think what people like that must be getting at is they think that my form of condemning things like sexism and homophobia is to shame these people, to yell at them, to just loudly say these people are scum or something like that. And I can't speak for anyone else when I say this, but that is not my attitude at all. One of the things I'm most ashamed of as a teenager was a period around about when I was 16, when I went around calling myself a homophobe. I didn't know what the word homophobe meant, but I did tend to use words like gay in a dismissive way. And I did tend to make comments like, oh, that's so gay, and things like that. Now, while these attitudes were more widespread while I was at school, I did this out of ignorance. I didn't know anyone personally who was open about the fact that they were gay. And certainly some of the people that I did know have come out since, but I didn't know they were gay at the time. I genuinely didn't know. When someone pointed out to me what the word homophobe actually meant, I was devastated. I mean, I was so embarrassed. It's one of the cringiest moments of my entire life. Now think about this for a second. I grew to have that general outlook on homosexuality out of ignorance and out of, the occasional "that's so gay" type comment. Now, I am an atheist. Generally, my position is not to encourage religious belief because it's fundamentally something that is not based on logic and evidence and reason. Both the Bible and the Quran are chock full of despicable passages about the treatment of women and gay people. But different denominations do tend to cherry pick different parts of their respective texts to fit with their specific worldview. Christianity has a dark past, but it has largely modernized completely, and most forms of Christian belief, certainly here in the UK, there may still be some issues in the States. There's obviously things like the Westboro Baptist Church, but generally speaking, Christianity has modernized. It has adopted a far more moderate position, one that's more compatible with, 21st century values. And it's done that out of necessity, because Christianity exists in such large numbers in Western nations. These are largely rich, technologically developed countries that encourage science and evidence-based worldview in general. But Islamic countries, generally speaking, tend to be less developed. And there are discussions about whether Islam's actually the cause of that. But regardless of Islam's role, I think the one thing we can agree on is that the social system in these countries, however it's defined, encourages these sexist, homophobic attitudes, and because of that, the individual people living in the society shouldn't be shamed. It's not appropriate to do so, because simply they don't know any better. They have probably never met an openly gay person, and the society largely discourages them from coming out. The United States is not perfect, but if we turn people away from these countries which systematically discourage LGBT rights and gender equality, we're not helping them. We're not improving the situation. Whereas if we let them in, if we expose them to our values, some of them, and even if not them specifically, their children, may well adopt far more moderate views. And then if they want to return to their home countries, things can snowball. They can start conversations and bring about positive change in their own countries as well. But by stopping them at the border, we encourage them to despise us even further, to push them away from our worldview. We know this is exactly how it works. This was Al-Qaeda's strategy. This is ISIS's strategy. This is exactly what they want us to do. They may not be as powerful as they once were, but they are celebrating because of this. Guaranteed. I think the appropriate response here is to look for human rights organizations in these countries, politicians that support more moderate forms of Islam that are more amenable to positive views on gender equality, on LGBT rights. The thing I find quite depressing about these issues is they tend to be first world issues, in that people are only really equipped to care about them once they've dealt with issues that more immediately affect them, like poverty, like access to education, like employment. And so once they have these things, generally speaking, obviously there are exceptions, but generally speaking, they do tend to become more progressive, more amenable to favourable positions on social justice issues. And that's one of the main reasons why Donald Trump actually won the election. A lot of people felt like we were just dismissing them as scum. Our PR has been less than great, in other words. And while I will always, this is not subject to negotiation, I will always be an ally to the LGBT community. I will always be for gender equality. It's also in our best interest to advocate for these things in a way that doesn't alienate other groups of people, that we don't take a hostile view towards anyone that doesn't already immediately agree with us. Now, I'm not saying we've all been like that. There are people that simply advocate by being themselves online. There's no shortage of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender YouTubers, and just generally speaking, gender non-conforming YouTubers that simply vlog about their own lives, that do their part just by being themselves and uploading their daily lives onto YouTube. This is a good thing. This is something we very much need to encourage more. But if your family, if your social setting in general is pretty much engineered so that if you take a favourable position on these issues, you will be alienated. Shaming these people, calling them scum, it doesn't help us. It sets us further back. It results in things like Trump. So I want to finish off by just asking a simple question to all Trump voters for whom what I've said has resonated. In other words, if at least a part of your vote was down to the fact that the SJWs have been giving you a hard time, as I've said, I will never not be an advocate for these issues. But given that fact, how would you prefer we communicate with you with regard to these issues? That's everything. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.